Dear colleagues, welcome to this side event of the 53rd session of the UN Statistical Commission on financing for data and statistics, the role of National Statistical Offices. I'm Francesca Perucci, Assistant Director at the UN Statistics Division, and it's my great pleasure to be with you and share a few remarks just to set the scene for today's discussion on the role of the NSOs, National Statistical Offices, can play in making the case for greater domestic investment in data and for closing the budget gap. We will hear about their challenges, different approaches and solutions, and how the UN system, donors, other partners can facilitate their task of securing the domestic funds they need to ensure the well-functioning of the data and statistical system in their country, but also the effective use of data at all levels of decision-making. So we will share just a few slides to help setting the scene for the discussion. So if we go to the first slide, financing has been on the global agenda for a long time. You all remember, I'm sure, the Marrakesh Plan in 2004, Better Data for Better Results, which was the global plan then for improving development statistics right after the launch of the MDGs. That was followed by the Busan Plan in 2011, which again called for increasing resources for statistical systems. And then with the adoption of the SDGs, we had what is currently guiding our capacity development activities, the Cape Town Global Action Plan that was launched at the first UN World Data Forum in Cape Town in 2017. That was followed by the Dubai Declaration in 2018, again launched at the UN World Data Forum, which called specifically for the establishment of an innovative funding mechanism open to all stakeholders, that with the aim of mobilizing both domestic and international funds, but also to activate partnerships, funding opportunities, and strengthening the capacity of national and data statistical system. And last year, finally, we had the Bern Compact in Bern, the UN launched in Bern at the UN World Data Forum, which also calls for increased investments in data to address the huge data gaps that still exist in informing the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And in that diagram, you see all the milestones and various other milestones. And then, of course, the adoption of the SDGs with the Addis Ababa agenda, that is also the framework for the funding of the implementation of the SDGs. If we go to the next slide, we just focus for a moment on the Cape Town Global Action Plan and the strategic area on mobilizing resources and the objective specifically of ensuring that the necessary resources are available. And we show some of the key actions under that objectives. So if we go to the next slide, there is a global consensus clearly that more investment in data is needed. And that's been clear over at least the last 2 decades. There's been a strong call for that. We also now have a strong governance for this agenda, given by the work of the high-level group for partnership, coordination, and capacity building, which is a group of member states represented by national statistical offices, established by the Statistical Commission. Also a strong framework given by the Cape Town Global Action Plan. And now, since last year, we have a new opportunity with innovative complementary solutions, the Global Data Facility of the World Bank, which will support data systems, data capacity, and data capital in low and middle income countries. And we have the support offered by the Clearinghouse for Development Data that will complement and support the GDF. And the Clearinghouse is a new multi-stakeholder initiative supported by the Bern Network that is designed to help increase transparency, efficiency of institutional financial support for data activities. And finally, we have the UN's Complex Risk Analytics Fund, the CRAF, which focuses on data in crisis situations specifically. And if we move to the next slide, please. So we do have consensus that funding is urgently needed. But as you can see, we still have a very large gap in resources. And it is estimated that the gap to be able to fully implement the Cape Town Global Action Plan is currently at 700 million. And if we look at, for instance, ODA, and if funding needs were to be met exclusively by ODA, it is estimated that implementing the Cape Town Global Action Plan would require moving from the current 0.3% of total ODA currently allocated for statistics to around 0.7% of total ODA. So that's a big jump that is required to really meet the financial needs of all data and statistical systems around the world. But today's event is about what happens at the national level and the possible solutions for national statistical offices to have the data needs prioritized in the allocation of domestic resources. And increasing engagement around national financial discussions is an important avenue. In this context, the integrated national financing frameworks aimed at aligning financing with the priorities of sustainable development certainly represent a very important tool. So I would like to now pass the floor to Natalia Aristizabal Mora, Interregional Advisor in the Financing for Sustainable Development Office in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs here at the UN, who will introduce the framework. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesca, and good morning, good evening to all. It's a real pleasure to be here to talk about INFF's integrated national financing frameworks. So I will briefly, speak about what they are and how they can, contribute to the important discussion you're having today. So INFFs were first introduced, or we first started to talk about INFFs in back in 2015 when the Addis Ababa Action Agenda was agreed on. And back then, countries also agreed to use these frameworks in order to approach the issue of financing the SDGs and the development priorities, the country development priorities. The INFF is not an additional tool developed by an international organization for the countries to adopt. It's more a new approach to financing problems and to financing problems that come from the fact that the development agenda is a long-term agenda. So it requires to go further in the timeline to the short termism we are used to when we as countries work on budget issues. So this new approach proposes to take into account all sources, all possible sources of financing for development, that is international sources, but also domestic sources, private and public. It proposes to approach or to take those sources into account in a comprehensive way, so we can spot better the coherences, the incoherences, the risks associated with those sources, and try to come up with policies that help to overcome those risks and binding constraints countries may face. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the INFFs, as I said, were first well, introduced to the discussion in 2015. And then the UN member countries gave the inter-agency task force on financing for development the mandate to develop some guidance in order to help or support countries to develop and implement those INFFs. And the guidance, which is now public and is you can find it in a dedicated website called inff.org, well, comprises an inception phase and 4 building blocks. The 4 building blocks are one on assessments and diagnostics, which aim at, well, setting more or less the scene for the countries to start to work on designing a financing strategy, which is building block 2. It also has a building block on monitoring and review. So countries can follow up on the policies they implement based on the financing strategy, and to correct the path. And it has also a building block on governance and coordination. Data and statistics play all along the way a big role, but especially they play a big role in the building blocks related to the assessment and diagnostic, and well, in the building block on monitoring and review. And why is this? Because, well, I'm stating the obvious, of course, but INFFs are supposed to be country-led, country-owned, and well, evidence-based. That is very important, and that evidence is, of course, provided by data and statistics. So again, we see well, a very big role played, especially in those 2 building blocks, but all along the way. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And to the next one. So I'm here, well, to talk very briefly about INFFs, to stress, well, the importance of data and statistics on the whole framework. And we thought, or we have been discussing this with Francesca and her team, the importance of, or the role data statistics and statistics play in the INFF help to raise even more the awareness of the importance of the sector, well, in the whole agenda for development. And so in that sense, we think, well, it may help and contribute to the discussion we are having today, but also, well, data and statistics, well, can become, or INFF can help to finance or to raise financing for data and statistics, as long as it is set as one of the development priorities by the country. And so in that sense, we also think that INFFs can contribute to the discussion we're having today. I will stop there and give back the floor to Francesca, and of course, well, I am open to answer any questions you may have well, later on. Back to you, Francesca. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. This was great. Really illustrates very clearly how important the use of this tool can be in ensuring that data are looked at not just as the source of what you need to implement the framework, but also a component of one of the priorities, one of the key assets for the implementation of the 2030 agenda. So that was great. Thank you so much again for sharing this with us today. And I'm sure there will be questions. But now to conclude this scene setting and also moderate the panel of the great speakers that we have with us today, I'm happy to pass it over to Sheda Baidi, who certainly doesn't need a lot of introduction. She's the managing director of Open Data Watch, and she's a partner in many of the data initiatives that we have here at the UN. Over to you, Shada.
Thank you. Thanks, Francesca. And thank you very much, Natalia. Greetings to all. It's really a pleasure to be here, both as a speaker to help with the scene setting, but also moderating this amazing panel that's ahead of us. I'm going to be speaking very fast to get to the panel because we have a very nice session for you organized. But let me just finish with a couple of more slides on the scene setting. As you heard from Francesca, the level of support for statistics, for data and statistics from the international sources is very much appreciated, and it's been quite steady, but it has not been at the level that's needed. And of course, we welcome very much the new facilities like the World Bank Global Data Facilities, the new trust funds that are being set up. But the conversation today is going to be very much focusing on the benefits of domestic resources. And we see that from a number of studies. For example, this slide summarizes the outcome, the study from a Paris 21 study looking at the benefits of the domestic resource mobilization, and obvious things that domestic resource mobilization is really important for sustainability and long-term capacity building. It's very much linked to national development plans, and alignment with those plans are crucial, as you also heard that from Natalia. It promotes greater coordination, even for the international donors and domestic donors at the national level. And of course, it leads to much higher predictability and stability than if countries are just reliant on international contribution for data and statistics. Next slide, please. And this higher predictability can actually help a lot. We're seeing this slide from the latest survey of the World Bank and the UN and UN Statistics Division and Paris 21. We'll see that many of the NSOs, almost 60% of the NSOs have shown that they have been delayed. Their work and their activities, data and statistics activities has been delayed due to delays in budget disbursement in many of these countries. So it's really important that we look at the domestic resource mobilization and how to improve these aspects, such as the predictability and effectiveness for data and statistics. Next slide. So today, I hope that our conversation would be very much focusing on making domestic resource mobilization a reality. A number of strategies that have been discussed on how this work as moving the domestic resource mobilization, how can we benefit from it, how can we plan for the future and align data and national plans, how can we keep an eye on the impact and not only on production through this planning process and this optimization of use of resources, and how can we use this opportunity to better understand the users and encourage the use of data. So this would be basically creating a cycle of better use of data leading to better relevance and trust in data, and finally more increased resources. So this was our scene setting. Thank you. And now we're going to move to our amazing panel, very important part of this seminar today. And we have 6 really amazing speakers that I want to first introduce and then go one-on-one with some questions for them. Then at the end of this section, we will stop for questions from you and address some of the things that you have on your mind. So please submit any questions you have in the chat, and we'll get to it at the end of this session. And then we're going to do a closing and some of the main takeaways from the discussions to be outlined. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our panelists. We're going to start with Mr. Dominique Roskrot. He doesn't need introduction in this group. He's the Director General of Statistics Poland. Welcome, Dominique. Then we're going to move to Sarah Sikanes Tolfelsen is the UN resident coordinator and designate official for security to Laos People's Democratic Republic. And she's with us. Really welcome her. And she's way 12 hours ahead of New York. So welcome and thank you for being with us. And then we move to Alex Chimio Feni, who is the Director General of National Statistics Agency of Namibia. And then after Alex, we get to Johannes Uding, who is the executive head of the PACE 21. And you all know Johannes, of course. And then after Johannes, we'll get to Aniket Bhushan, who's actually the policy analyst of the Global Affairs Canada. We're really glad to have him with us. And finally, we'll move to Mr. Juan Daniel Oviedo Aronango, who is the Director General of DANE, Colombia. So these are our 6 panelists. Let me start with you, Dominic, and thanks for being our first speaker. I will have 2 questions for you, but I start with the first one. And the question for you is, in your role as the Director General of Statistics Poland, what good practices and approaches have you developed to fundraise for data and statistics? And what have been the main challenges, Dominique? You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaida. So to make it more dramatic, I'll start with something awful. You know, let's be honest, these processes are not always objective, and personal relations, for example, with the other ministries are very important. But then you ask yourself a question: what can I do objectively? And there are a few things that I think we've been trying to exercise effectively in our system. So I'll start with, of course, the most boring thing, but very important strategically, is something. It is something that I would call grassroots work. I know, positivist attitude, you know, investment into the future, like, for example, through statistical literacy. Like, we have 3,000 students each year participating in our, you know, statistical Olympiad, and that's really an investment into the future, because these people will be ministers and someday, you know. But anyway, of course, we need to communicate better that the ultimate objective is to provide society with the necessary information to bridge the information gap. All this communication is extremely important, and we need to build it up, you know, regularly, you know, systematically and efficiently and effectively among the you know, members of the society, so that the awareness of what a statistical system is for would be better than it is nowadays. You know, we should say openly that functioning of today's societies is based on the functioning of the effective information governance, and the right to information is the basis for our existence. It's always helpful to come back to basic fundamental values, you know, ultimate objectives, and try to communicate them as much as possible, because that really pays off in the future. Then the second thing I think we've been trying very effectively is to focus on innovation and then searching for development financing programs. You know, you can easily get money if you try to advocate for change, you know, and if you want to introduce some change, and when you present that the change will lead to improved efficiency and effectiveness, then you know, that's easy to get financing. Next thing I would like to mention is bring policymakers on board when they need you urgently. It happens at times, you know, and then there is an occasion to bring them on board. Policymakers will start noticing the importance of statistics, and then you can build on that and build something more strategic. For example, we may observe what policies, strategies, and programs are being built, and try to kind of like include the coverage, you know, explicit coverage of statistical activities in those programs. And that also pays off in the future, because we are then explicitly already there in those policies, and you don't need to justify again from scratch that you're needed. A perfect example for us is our participation in our, you know, national review process of Agenda 2030. You know, we are explicitly working on that with the Ministry of Development. Then I would say that the strategy that I always had is the inclusion of stakeholders at various levels of cooperation, informal and formal, creating the principles of broad inclusion of stakeholders, including data users, then they become your advocates in the process of trying to get more financing. That really pays off in the future. Well, we had another great example of that. We have managed to have a success with our Ministry of Foreign Affairs in mobilizing them to include us in our ODA programs, and we are now explicitly, mentioned, and we already get some financing for Moldova, for Georgia, for Ukraine, and it's very useful. Okay, and just to finish, we need to go. Of course, there are many discussions now that we also participate here in this community, which relates to, for example, issue of stewarding, and playing the role of data stewardship. Just go beyond being a regular data producer. We need to really try to, exercise new roles, because this will increase our competence and also visibility on the data ecosystem. That's very important, because then you get more important, for others. So ultimately, building on all of those, I think what we can do is then using it to build relations, use those built relations to strengthen the argumentation of financial needs, I would say. So that's basically our experiences in this regard.
Thank you. Thanks, Dominic. Those are great points. My second question for you is more looking at the international community, and what guidance do you have for the broader international communities to support domestic resource mobilization for data and statistics? Now that you have a good national approach, what is your guidance for international support?
Thank you for this question. Of course, we can have many experiences, but we have to be aware that there are major challenges still waiting. The first one is that we are not seen on the front line very often. The ministries are on the front line, and we are not seen then. And the Ministry of Finance are always reluctant to give our financing because there are others more important, let's say, whatever. So the challenge is always that. And the one that I also see coming is that after the pandemic, the budgets will be even more tight, and we have to be aware of that. And of course, the third thing is that if we try to exercise new roles, the whole process of development becomes more complex and complicated. But in a way, I think that there are some general ideas that might be useful for others, and I want to share them now. First of all, partnerships. Get others involved in whatever you do. It will pay off. It's not only that you help others, but through doing this, you help yourself as well, because you bring in a lot of expertise from outside. And the same goes into international, dimension, international collaboration. It's not only giving. I always tell my staff, get involved in these projects. It's not only that you're giving something, you're learning a lot, because you have the opportunity to interact with people with the other perspectives, with the other experiences, and it's always very useful. So, and it's low-hanging fruit, I would say. Then the third thing is, I always suggest to my staff, and I think it's very important for us statisticians, because we are seen as a very boring community. I mean, we need to focus on delivering results, and you need to have a clear agenda. I'm going to deliver this month, and the next month this is going to come, and we need to be, trying to be on the surface in terms of a public discourse all the time. Of course, we should always start reaching for low-hanging fruits, and that's always very useful, because we can start very intensively and talk and engage as much as possible, raise awareness, serving as a data steward, not as a data disseminator only. And finally, just be there, be present, be heard, communicate. This is a very important issue, that you not only communicate the results, but also communicate about yourself and how important you are in all of that. And that all of this wouldn't happen if you wouldn't invest in something. So try to involve people also in a storytelling, not only about the statistics themselves, but also in how they are created. That I would say as a suggestion. Then you will be heard and seen.
Thank you. Thanks, Dominique. Again, very, very good advice, both on the national side and the approach and also international. Thank you for that. We'll come back to you during the Q&A. Of course, I'm sure there would be some questions for you. Moving to you now, Sarah. Sarah, you bring a very important perspective for today's discussion. Given your role as the resident coordinator, you have insight into different conversations with government ministries and national statistical offices. What is the role of the resident coordinator and UN country team in helping national statistical offices in making their case for financing data and statistics work? Over to you, Sarah, for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Shaida. And let me first also say hello to my fellow panelists from all around the world, which really showcases the universal importance of statistics, I'd say. And thanks for inviting me to speak on this panel. In my role as resident coordinator, I'm of course fortunate to have a broad insight, as you say, to different conversations with government ministries and National Statistical Office, but also with development partners at large and users and producers alike. And from these experiences, we also note that the Statistical Office often struggles to make its case for budget allocations, in particular as Lao finds itself in a debt crisis and with a very tight fiscal space. So where statistics can mistakenly be seen as an area where investments can be reduced because it doesn't lead to immediate social costs or contribute immediate social gains, it happens that it's down prioritized. In Laos, this has led to heavy reliance on donors for additional financing to carry out statistical work by the LSB, or the Lao Statistics Bureau, which is therefore unsustainable and insufficient in the long run. It really becomes reliant on periodic service, for example, the census every 10 years, and the agriculture service and household service and food security assessments, which then take up a lot of the staff time of the Bureau in terms of meeting all the associated regular reporting requirements for that type of funding. And this can also lead to fragmentation and the absence of an overarching strategy on statistics, with individual prospects contingent on funders, areas of interest, and less focus on sustainably building core capacities that annually can produce the data sets necessary for course corrections and policy making, for example. And this is where the UNCT comes in particular given the imperative, the 2030 agenda on leaving no one behind, and the need for disaggregated data to really show how policies hit differently on different population groups. And we are therefore an important partner in the collection of data and also consumer of this disaggregated information to inform our own programming. So it's particular interest in forming and working to strengthen the capacity of statistical systems. And here it's interesting to hear when I spoke to the Bureau today, speaking about this panel and the questions I had been asked, they actually pointed that a lot of the donor support often goes to technical advice rather than the capacity building component, which then leaves a lot left to do more regular work. So in the reform development system, the RC can play a particularly useful role on making the case for the importance of statistics across the board rather than associated with any particular mandate, either amongst agencies or within government entities themselves. And this inherently lends itself to an approach to developing the full statistical system and building core capacities to generate and use data, rather than focusing on the technicalities of any specific data issue or programmatic preference or mandate, which I think is important for the sustainability of these offices. And this is the approach we've tried to take on our new cooperation framework, in which there's a dedicated output area, in fact, on public administration reform and data-driven governance, which brings together the work of all relevant UN country team members, not just on how statistics are generated, but how then they are used to inform decision-making as a whole. And this has been particularly critical during the pandemic, where the Statistical Office notes that where the role of statistics and visibility has increased, user engagements and high-level meetings on data sharing and open data has become a very, very interesting topic for many.
Thanks, Thanks, Sarah. Thanks. Second question I have for you, since we're running out of time, you probably have 2 minutes now for the second question. What do you believe would be a tangible solution moving forward for the National Statistical Offices and actually wider statistical system to help ensure sustainable financing for data and statistics production?
Well, I'd say that when resources are limited, as we have the case here, it's more important than ever to ensure that resources that are available are used as effectively as possible, which means targeting them in the right place. And for what we need, detailed, reliable data, preferably disaggregated, as I said, by age, sex, and geography, but also importantly by income, by ethnic or minority groups, etc., which can be vital for when targeting development programming. And at least, for example, the vaccination campaigns, understanding the transmission rates and so on in the pandemic, which then aims to leave no one behind. So investment in data actually becomes even more important as fiscal space reduces. And this has been highlighted recently with the help of the economic crisis and the pandemic by the highest level of government, in which Prime Minister Pankam here called on the new leadership of the Ministry of Planning and Investment to specifically generate high quality statistics and data that were easily accessible, end quote. And this is actually one of the first times that we hear high level governance speak on these issues. So practically, there's a lot more data that is already collected by governments. And this is also an important point as my final one, as they go about their regular work. For example, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Labour and Social Welfare, and even private sector actors within the example, for example, banking, insurance companies, and education, as they implement their programs, services, and activities. But this is simply not processed and made available for broader use. And with the cost for its processing absorbed by the public and private sector regular budgets themselves, as opposed to the budget allocations of statistical offices, could be alleviated. In particular, in a resource-constrained environment, finding ways to make better use of such data, or administrative data more generally, with appropriate privacy safeguards, I need to add, in which the anonymization of data would be essential, but the profile it could provide on the needs and character of the behavior of the population could be equally essential for development programming. And that could be an efficient way in improving data availability, not instead of, but a very, very good complement to in the situation in which we find it.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks. And I also really appreciate how, based on your experience from where you are at the UN regional, as a regional resident coordinator, the importance of how to improve the priority of statistics by showing its value and showing its use. Is really appreciate that, and some practical guidance on that. We'll come back with, I'm sure, more questions on that from the audience. Let me now move to our next speaker, Alex. It's time to come to you with your experience as a Statistician General, Namibia of a statistical agency. You are currently in the process of securing funding to conduct the next population and housing census in Namibia. How do you engage with the ministries and other key national stakeholders to ensure national funding for it? And how is this work related to the work to ensure stable funding for regular activities in between census? Over to you, Alex, for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Shaida, and thank you for having me. Thank you for the questions. I'm really happy to be here representing Namibia. I also see I'm representing my continent, Africa. Hope I'll do justice to my colleagues as well. To answer the question, first of all, I think it's very important to create an understanding of what we do as statistics officers, because at times some of the data collections projects like surveys and censuses, they need to be better explained. For example, when you look at census, the general understanding that people have is that we count people. But if you really look at that, this is really the fundamental basis for any economic planning, social planning, and also for policy making. Now, it's very key to understand. If you give that understanding, also is that people will also understand why a census is also costly, because if you go to follow social media in Namibia, you have these funny comments of having to look at birth certificates and death certificates and deduct and get the population. That is good. Let me not bore the audience, because that is a subject matter that is very well understood by all of us. Now, for the upcoming census, what we have done, we have successfully held a resource mobilization conference where we asked all the stakeholders to pledge, which is the ministries, the public sector, as well as the private sector. And our key message there was really to say that, to talk about the importance of statistics, that everyone benefits. Now, also before we move to that resource mobilization conference, is that with our Ministry of Finance, when we had to motivate our budget, we managed to successfully position the census as a development project rather than just another operational project, because of the impact it has in fueling the development of the country. And also coming back to the resource mobilization conference, is that the private sector also tend to benefit. And we always used to give examples of whether it's insurance companies benefiting in terms of life expectancy of the country, and even future births and so on, or that they can expect. So we had to make that message very, very clear. And then also, since the Statistical Office also is mainly known to carry out only census, we also create a lot of awareness of the financial needs as well as the advantages of the census. Just like I said earlier, to say why we need that, because we need to go to each and every corner of the country. So meaning in itself also, the census is the advantage of the whole process of the census planning process up to enumeration. It's also a good tool to promote the existence of the Statistics Office. One of the previous speakers also spoke about visibility. I think census gives us that advantage. Now we also then have to explain in terms of the output out of that, what's coming out from the census, the sampling frame, which is the basis of all the census, all the surveys that will be undertaken, whether by private, whether by NSA, the statistics agency, or the private sector. And then finally, after successful funding of statistics for the census, the other statistical data collection programs will also become easier, because we have created a basis already from the census, and then everything else will flow from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. It looks like you're having good luck with collecting the needed resources, and more luck to you. And maybe through this webinar, there would be more support for you coming, hopefully. My second question for you would be, based on your experience, what are the key opportunities and challenges to help ensure national financing for official statistics?
Yeah, thanks. The first challenge, like I said earlier, is really that the understanding for the importance of statistics. And I think the previous speaker also mentioned that one of the reasons maybe is that the return on investment on investing into statistics is maybe not immediate. That's the reason. But also that gives us a reason that we need to advocate further on that one, because currently you find that statistics will be treated as an ad hoc function. That's why also when budgets need to be cut, there's also maybe it's one of the items that needs to be cut. So there is a need to reposition the importance of statistics, as well as to create the value to both the public and private sector. They need to know why this is a good investment. The second challenge, which can also be an opportunity actually, is the whole aspect of coordination. Because if you look at the Namibian setup, we are decentralized. The statistics, the NSOs is decentralized. And we have ministries and departments that have their own budgets. Then budgets can actually be well coordinated so that we can come out with mutual benefit to all the stakeholders that can bring their funds into that one pot, in terms of they will benefit in terms of not only in terms of finances because of multi-topic surveys that you can do, but they also can benefit in terms of the multi-topics that is there and the cross-cutting analysis that can come out as opposed to studies that can take place or surveys. And then also, one of the ways also maybe opportunities there from domestically to collect funds is that, or for funding for statistics really is that if you look at the country like Mali, they have successfully implemented the fund for the development of statistics, where they charge something like 1% of the import values for the country. With the further discussions, there's a good reason for why on the import goods and not anything else. We can always get to that. And then the agreement that the statistics officer should also spend at least 1% of national budget that we have agreed at our international agendas is that currently is not working in Namibia because it's also one of the, I think Sarah alluded to that, is that if you already have a budget deficit for a country, you will not even have to look, you cannot even look at allocating an additional percentage on something else. That is really a challenge. But then my view on that one is also to say that we have UN member countries, as we are all. I was just looking at the figures last night to say, what are the countries' contributions to the UN? And I thought if you can find a way of bringing it in there, and the UNSD can maybe coordinate that. But the challenge with that is that the countries that are also contributing the least are the ones that really needs the funding. So that might not solve the solution, but we really need to look at that. And I think a development fund locally is something that you can really think of. And then finally, just to close off, is just to say that we speak a lot about evidence-based planning. This is the information that we give to the users of statistics. I really want us also to turn that around and say, just like Sarah also said that return on investment, maybe it's long term. So even when it comes out, we really need to take that and show the people and say that, look, it's from the collection of statistics that this policy was maybe implemented, just to show the benefit of the use of statistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Really fascinating and a lot of food for thoughts. I really appreciate your comments on coordination, placing value on importance of statistics, and of course your comment on need to show evidence and need to show the value at the end of the day is tremendously important. I also very interested in the idea of the Mali 1% allocation of the national budget to statistics, and it's something that maybe we can talk about at the later stage in this conference and maybe later. Going to evidence-based, and we've heard from two countries, we've heard from Dominique and we've heard from Alex, and then we've heard from Sarah, a view from the UN coordination side. And now we're going to move to Johannes Juding. Johannes, you come with a very different and interesting perspective as sort of providing support for statistical capacity building and advocating for resources and producing evidence on the importance of the data. And now you have the clearinghouse. How do you expect the clearinghouse to facilitate both the engagement of the international donors, but also increase the resources for national statistical offices domestically and optimize their use? You have 3 minutes, Johannes, for your first question.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be taking part in this important event, and thanks for inviting me and Paris 21 to this conversation. Let me put this question into a broader context. Before I speak about the clearinghouse, let me just tell you a little bit about what kind of problems the clearinghouse tries to solve. And I think what we have heard so far is from many of the speakers, nearly from all speakers, is that statistical systems are underfunded, and they are underfunded, and we have seen the numbers. And I wanted to particularly say here, in particular in low-income countries or in small island development states. So we have heard that argument very well. We also hear from donors, and it has been mentioned before, there is the BURN network. It's a loose coalition of stakeholders that is interested in this topic of more and better funding for data and statistics. And one aspect that I really want to put here on the table is the quality of funding. It's the smarter funding. So it's not only a question of more funding, it's also a question of smarter funding. Your question is, what can the clearinghouse do? The clearinghouse, first of all, it's a platform. It has been formally launched at the World Data Forum last year in October in Bern, and you can visit it. So my colleagues will put it in the chat, and you will see there is a platform which is interesting. It's very interesting to go there to see what kind of flows are given by donors to recipient countries in very specific areas of data and statistical support. So it helps with transparency. It helps with making the investment case. Shaida, imagine you are an investment officer in an aid agency. You want to know where other investment officers are investing, so you can complement that funding. And you want also to see what the demand side is. We have 4 very, very interesting country profiles in the clearinghouse. We have Rwanda, we have Malawi, we have Niger, and we have the Gambia. And you can see in these profiles what kind of national resources are mobilized and where international support can help. So it's a platform for bringing better supply and demand. It has interesting country profiles so that countries can themselves see, and we have seen it through our own work in countries, that often this kind of information we have at the international level may not be there at the national level, so countries can find those information. And really an important point is building communities. So we hope that through exchange by people seeing of how you can mobilize more and better resources for data statistics in a given country, you can change things for the better. Let me just give you the example of Rwanda, who is a great case of seeing of more domestic resource mobilization. There's a high level of political support. And it has helped quite a lot to align and to mobilize these resources for national strategies of Rwanda for development. So you can see it's driven by political commitment, but it's also driven by a good national plan. And this alignment is very key. So the clearinghouse is, of course, just a tiny drop in a bigger ocean, but I think it provides us the way for more and better funding.
Thank you, Johannes. That's fantastic. My second question for you is just along the lines of explaining the clearinghouse. Can you give us a sort of a practical example how clearinghouse can be useful for a country?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. Let just be in terms of preceding this with the question of international organization and how they can help with this sort of providing concrete support for a country. I think we have to see that, and this has been said a couple of times, and we really need to stress this, the COVID pandemic, how this has put a strain on national statistical offices. Because to some extent they are squeezed. On the one hand, there's less support, there's a lot of pressure on public finances, as we have heard from all countries, less money available, but more demand for data. So the support, the international support for national statistical offices is absolutely key, in particular for low-income countries and for low-capacity countries. So we need ODA, we need official development assistance for these things to happen next to domestic resource mobilization. Now we have in the clearinghouse, we have a couple of countries. I mentioned Rwanda, but there's also Malawi. And we had a couple of times the pleasure and the honor to have the chief statistician of Malawi showing of how through specific information provided in the clearinghouse, she can lobby vis-a-vis the planning minister and the finance minister where actually there are gaps for investment in data and statistical systems. Now, I know that Aniket will speak after me, so he knows about the conversation about 8 orphans. There are 8 orphans in this world. There are also statistical and data orphans. Specifically, there are some countries who receive quite a lot of support in specific areas, while there are other countries that really lack support for critical things. And let me just mention one is civil registration and vital statistics systems, which are so crucial as a foundational system. And as we have heard, capacity development, all those things are often underfunded, while we see an quote unquote an overfunding for specific data production that may be interesting for international monitoring. So there is really a need, and the clearinghouse can help to invest more in foundational system, invest in CRVS systems, invest in gender data production. And the clearinghouse, I should have said that, Shida, it has a specific channel on data, on gender data, which is extremely important to get, in particular, as we are coming out of the crisis and want to build back better. We need to see investments in these kind of things, sex disaggregated data, and we really do hope that the clearinghouse can make a useful contribution to this.
Thanks, Johannes. That's fantastic, and really appreciate also our colleague Sasha has put the link in the chat for connection to the clearinghouse for those who haven't had a chance to click on it and see what it offers. But really promising in many ways of along the lines of all we've been discussing today, as how to increase the value for data, how to increase coordination, how to sort of bring partners together. So clearinghouse is really the place for doing that. Thanks, Johannes. Now moving to Aniket, who has been mentioned several times. So, I'm sure all our audience are eager to hear from you. Based on your experience as our representative from Global Affairs Canada, based on your experience, what principles should guide donor investment in data and statistics? Over to you, 3 minutes.
Thank you. And please be very. I'd be very happy for you to crack the whip. I feel like I'm very happy to be here. It's my pleasure to represent Canada. I would also commend the organizers for the sequencing. I'm very happy to go, especially after Johannes, and after having the benefit of hearing the previous presenters who are much more informed and can be much more eloquent. I have to preface my remarks by saying I'm coming from a limited donor perspective. I think that's one thing that you'll hear further in my remarks, that the donor involvement and a bilateral donor such as ourselves in this case comes from a specific vantage point, and it has its own constraints. So let me just say, at a broad level, coming from this relatively narrow donor perspective, we would strongly endorse and believe the need to keep in mind two key principles. The first, and these have all been spoken about, so a lot of what I'm saying is merely going to be an echo and not anything new for you. The first is sustainability. For any investment or reform process that is in a foundational fundamental area, and I can't think of a more foundational fundamental area than NSO capacity and data and statistical capacity more generally, sustainability is key. Sustainability is important as a response function in the face of an ever-changing and ever-evolving landscape, both internal and external, as we've seen. The second key principle I would highlight is country ownership. And I want to really strongly emphasize, when I speak, and I speak on behalf of the department about country ownership, I do not mean this just limited in the sense of the aid effectiveness principles, which are obviously well understood, well accepted, and recognized. I mean it in a much more sort of deeper sense, and let me speak to that. I would say that given the context, we're really very aware of some fundamental constraints. And the fundamental constraint I think that we should highlight, and others already have in this discussion, is the fiscal constraint. This extends clearly, as we've heard, in the context of developing countries, but it also extends in the context of donor countries, and in the case of the pandemic, for some of the very same reasons. So we must be aware of that. So in the face of all of this, what does it really mean for a donor perspective? And here I would highlight the primacy of what we see as three key elements. So from a donor investment perspective, what we would like and to ensure is that donor investment, number one, is catalytic. We can go into a discussion about what that actually means. Is it just a jargon term? I would welcome that discussion, but let me leave it there for this opening. Secondly, we see the need for much better coordination and focus. To a large extent, we support Paris 21 and the clearinghouse for this reason, because we see the need and the importance of this. Thirdly, I would highlight we really see a very strong need for donor efforts to be more informed by relevant country-level analysis that accurately reflects prioritization. And this brings me full circle back to, again, the importance of Paris 21 and forums such as the Clearinghouse, but also to emphasize that as much as what we want to see, it's about what we don't want to see. What we don't want to see is any evidence of crowding out, and crowding out, not just in the financial sense, but also in the sense of prioritization of the reform and investment process. So I hope that's sufficient for our start, China.
Yes, Aniket, and it was so wonderful that I didn't use my whip to stop you. Really appreciate that. Second question, if you could be brief, is how has Global Affairs Canada leveraged their support to benefit domestic resource mobilization for sectoral data, such as health or gender?
Yes, and please feel free to, if you need to use that whip this time around. Let me again try to be very concise, because I'm at the outset, I should say, I'm not sure we do enough, or we do a good enough job, and I think this is a sort of a humble reflection, I would say. Let me also note that what Global Affairs Canada does is very much in concert and close collaboration with at least two key Canadian providers, one being Statistics Canada, which has a very strong global reputation and presence, including presence at Paris 21, and the other being the International Development Research Center, IDRC, which similarly does quite foundational work in this area. So over the last few years, Canada's support has been approximately 25 million annual. I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I'm happy to go into this in more detail, but I would highlight that anybody who's worked with Canada knows that I would argue we are one of the more data-driven development partners. If you see the overarching guiding framework of Canada's development policy, it's known as the FIAP, the Feminist International Assistance Policy. It's very data-driven and centric. And you couple that with the strong experience of Canada in using RBM, the results-based management framework. These are very heavy data rich or data demand areas. And I will just add that as partners, we have a significant aligned vested interest, because we are relying on developing country data, on quality data from NSOs, administrative data, agency level data, to inform and guide our programming. This is especially the case in the area of SBS, sector budget support and general budget support that we provide. And again, I can go into more detail in that in the Q&A.
Thank you. Thanks, Aniket. And thanks also on behalf of many of us who have benefited from the investment and guidance from the Global Affairs Canada, particularly on the gender issues and CRVS and some of the foundational data support that you have provided. It's time to say thank you to you. Now, moving to our last speaker, Juan Daniel, I probably have to merge my two questions for you into one. Is that okay? Because we're running out of time, and I actually don't want to steal time from your last session, which is Q&A, and then the closing. So the question for you, Juan Daniel, is that from your sort of from where you are based on your experience, what do you believe are key elements for securing national funding for data and statistics, and also particularly for managing the relationships with the other parts of your national statistical system in mobilizing resources? Over to you, Juan Daniel. If you can manage with 3-4 minutes, I would really appreciate.
Thank you, Shada. The most difficult challenge to be the last of the panel session, but this is very interesting because it could help me to wrap up some of the comments that we have heard from the participants. And particularly, I would like to appeal to the contributions from Global Affairs Canada, under which it was very clear from Aniket that well, we are trying to see how to set a development agenda in a specific country as Colombia. We need to align the public budget with the official development assistance from international cooperation in our country around public policy priorities. But as Aniket was mentioning, when we are talking about international support, we are looking for evidence or impact of the investments or the resources that we receive. And in the advancement of the national statistic systems, we are finding the opportunity to play a role in this important strategic alignment between public policy and a statistical capacity in order to orientate the main roads in order to approach development in our countries. And also, I would like to highlight the intervention from Natalia, a warm hello to her, a colleague from Colombia, because the 5 pillars of the integrated national financing frameworks is very important because they provide an strategic opportunity for national statistic systems to say something, which is we are here, we have a voice, we can manage how official statistics could integrate together in order to set evidence, in order to illustrate which are the main needs in the development agenda in our countries. And at the same time, we could manage a very important role that has been inspired in the last years in the Statistical Commission about the role of data stewards or the role of data stewardship. Sometimes independence of National Statistics Office provides an argument to stay apart from what's happening in our societies. But we have proven in the more recent years that understanding and expressing this understanding of what's happening from the social, economical, or environmental dimensions in our countries is something very important. We could, because with this understanding, we could set data or information needs that should be developed in the national statistic systems. That's why in the case of Colombia, the role of having a voice and showing understanding of what's happening in the socioeconomic development in our country has placed, as a matter of example, important mandates in the national development plans or even in legal frameworks that we need, for example, to make visible historically discriminated population in Colombia. And that's why we have obtained resources from the public budget, from international cooperation, and even from non-governmental organizations in order to support surveys, to develop assessments of questions or strategies in order to accomplish those data requirements that are aligned with public policy and with official development assistance, something which is highly valuable in the framework of the integrated national financing frameworks that Natalia was sharing with us. So I believe that playing the role of data stewards and at the same time taking advantage of the strategic scenarios under which we are trying to align clear which are the data or statistics requirements in our society, and there we are going to be visible as regards as funding or some technical support in order to accomplish this responsibility. Thank you, Shade.
Thank you, Juan Daniel. Very, very important. And thanks for connecting all the dots with the other speakers. That's tremendously important. Now, for the next at least 10, 15 minutes, it would be great to go back to some of the questions that we have received through the Q&A from our panelists. We don't have any specific questions for anyone, but let me just highlight a few questions and sort of see who wants to take it on. One is that the importance of the INFF is being recognized and by our audience. And the question is, how can NSOs and the statistical community engage in this work? I was wondering if I can go to the Natalia for a very quick response on this, if you can help us, Natalia. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Sheida, and thank you very much. Thank you very much for the question. That's a very important one. Sorry. So the first step on an INFF is to, well, basically what we call the inception phase or the scoping phase, when we try to figure out what is in place in one country in terms of financing for development. And what is in place, well, that that includes what are the assessments, what is the information that is in place, and also what is the governance setting in place. And usually, well, there we have the statistics, the National Statistics Offices participating not only with the provision of the information, the assessments, the diagnostics they already have produced, but also as a key player, a key stakeholder. What usually happens or has happened in the countries where we have started to develop and implement an INFF is that in that since that scoping phase, that inception phase, we have the National Statistics Offices participating, and usually countries set up like a special committee for INFFs, usually coordinated by the Ministry of Planning or the Ministry of Finance, but with the participation of NSOs in that committee, again, to provide the information, their input, and also to advocate for the needs for further data and diagnostics for, well, moving forward with the process. And I will stop there. I hope
Thank you.
having answered.
Thank you, Natalia. And we will probably, from our side, we will probably need to get more information, and with the help of Francesca and her team, actually make these connections with the National Statistical Offices to use INFF. So thank you so much. This has been an important contribution today. One of the next questions we have is, I'm going to go to Dominique. Dominique, your discussion on how to build relationship, particularly with Ministry of Finance, has triggered some interesting questions on how do you, can you say a few more words about it, as how to optimize and balance what you said, the subjective and objective aspects of this relationship. Dominique, can I come to you for that?
Yes, thank you very much. That's a very interesting and tricky question, because it's always a tricky situation, and we need to find a balance by, I would advise by referring to our core values. I mean, you always need to ask yourself whether this kind of like a new thing or is something that is kind of like touching upon being subjective can be somehow justified in terms of our core values, or does it go too far away? And if it goes too far away, then we need to find a solution how to kind of like, for example, let's assume that there's some initiative that in its core isn't that bad from the ministry, but in some way kind of like is violating our core values. We cannot reach out beyond some things, we cannot, advise in policies in terms of, justifying some results this way or the other. But then we can again build a partnership with some stakeholders which are external to us, which can make this additional step, which we are not allowed to take. And then by contributing to their work, they can add a value to what we've done, and then continue to cooperate with the ministry in a way that the ministry would expect us, yet still at the same time not involving us directly. So we really kind of like finish our role at the exact border that we cannot pass. That's very important, but that's very tricky, and you have to kind of like be very careful each time it happens.
Thanks, Dominique, and thanks for being so realistic and telling us the real story of how complex it is. I was wondering, Alex, do you want to also come in on this one as our country speaker to sort of see how in your view, the relationship with, particularly with the Ministry of Finance, could be managed, and any tips or tricks? Alex, are you there?
Yes, yes, I'm here. No, I think I've said much in my intervention before in terms of the relationship. I think this is now from our experience. I think it really just came out from value for the stakeholder, which is the shareholder, which is the government, and that really comes also from the understanding. For example, at the moment, I think next week there will be a budget speech in Parliament, and we had some privy to some insight in terms of where the government is lacking or is challenged. Now, what I was happy with is that at least they could also use some statistics to make some key decisions in terms of maybe how to balance the budget or how to cut the budget. So for me, the way I see it as the head of the statistics office is that with the positioning that we want to position the statistics office, I think we are getting there slowly, but it's getting there. And with always challenges in terms of if leadership change in the ministry or so, I think then you need to restart from the beginning. But all in all, the underlying matter here is that it's really just to show the value of statistics to government, and then I think everything else will fall in place.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
My final question is going to be, well, we have some really good questions in the chat, but we won't have time to address all of them, of course, and we will be happy to engage with any of the audience here. But one final question for all the panelists, if we can have a quick flash response to this question. We saw from the discussion here that it's very important that we would raise the priority of statistics within the national setting and national plan. So what would be that one thing that you recommend that should be done for getting statistics further up the list of priorities? Alex, since you're on my screen, can I start with you? That one thing.
Yeah, I think it will sound odd, but really what I would think is that I think there's a need to put the trust in statistics. Like the previous speakers said that the return on investment, unfortunately, you don't realize it in the short term. But I think maybe it's upon us to show those evidence in terms of already maybe just or just some time back was motivating in terms of the budget, in terms of why the census cannot be cut. There's a correlation between countries with higher human development index and the carrying out of statistics. I think Norway is one of the, this is the top, is one topic, and they have been consistently since 1801, they have been doing their census. So it's not a surprise that they are actually leading the human development index. And some of the countries that have not been doing it, they are lower in the pack. And it's nothing to do with about the richness of the country or so. I think it's about the plan and the execution thereof. So I would really say that we should put our trust in statistics, and then the value out of the return on investment will also come of that. So we need to invest now for the future return on investment.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Sarah, I actually got this phrase from you on getting statistics further up the list of priorities. Can I come to you for that one example, one idea that you have for how to do it?
Thank you. Yes, the length of cooperation frameworks, and most donors, as well as the UN country team has these, span for 3 to 5 years. But when you have censuses and survey material that comes only every 5 to 10 years, you're lucky if you can read the trend and the results of what you have actually set out to do, unless you have data that comes in more regularly than every 5 to 10 years. So the one thing I would argue for in order to set our programming right is to have decreased the periodicity of data, and that is absolutely insanely important in order to prove that our development programming actually is targeted and achieving what we set out to do.
Thanks, Sarah. Now coming to you, Johannes, same question. I won't repeat it.
I think, I mean, if we see the interest in data and statistics, it hasn't been greater since decades, I would say. I mean, if I recall the conversation 5-6 years ago, the topic of data and statistics internationally and nationally wasn't there. It has completely changed. We have the SDGs, we have Agenda 2030, we now have COVID, we are coming out of COVID, building back better, digitalization, climate change, gender data, it's all there. What we need to do is link in each country the political debates in societies to evidence and to data. That's, I think we need to help our fellow statistical offices, friends and data friends to go out of and sort of engage. I hear Alex saying communication, engagement, doing it in a comfortable way. And I hear our colleague from Poland sort of, it depends on each country's legal framework and so on and so forth. But I think it's no other solution. You have to get out, you have to engage with societies, and then they will come back to you and say, we need more from you. And then you say, okay, here, I need a little bit of help from you as well. Then I can deliver.
Thanks, Johannes. Wonderful. Aniket, your one thing for raising the profile or the priority?
Yeah, I'm going to try to direct this at the NSO side and the NSO audience maybe, and I'm going to abuse your rules a little bit and try to do two things. One, I would say, to find champions and alliances. Like, we've had this discussion, but we haven't had a lot of discussion about technology. Find champions and alliances where you can prove and show a case for greater efficiency, more effectiveness through the use of technology, through the use of digitalization, and so forth. Secondly, also for NSOs, use the platforms and the mechanisms that exist to actively resist against the temptation to chase the latest shiny object. If your head is not in climate data ecosystems, please use the channels that are there to communicate to donors and partners that is more important to invest in CRVS or whatever it is, because we need to hear that. I mean, to hear that clearly.
Aniket, that's wonderful. Thank you. And it's okay that you did two instead of one. Dominique, over to you for that one thing for getting statistics further up the list of priorities.
I would probably repeat the same thing as predecessors. You know, you need to be engaged, involved with our stakeholders, with our users, and we need to bring them on board and make them one team with us. That will be much easier for us to argue for any increase in financing. There has to be a common interest and not only on our side but also on the side of our stakeholders, and we have to share this interest, and if we effectively manage to involve them, then this is 90% of a success.
Thanks, Dominique. Juan Daniel, do you want to come in on this one thing that you would do to raise the the statistics? Right.
I'm looking forward to. I believe that National Statistics Offices should understand, or we should be aware that statistical requirements or statistical needs should be transformed in a very proactive way in business cases. We have to express in a very explicit way which are the returns from social perspective, from governance perspectives, or even from the economic perspectives of supplying the information that we require in our societies. That's why we should become institutionally effective. So we need to state our requirements in a very sound way that could be seen as business cases that provide social and economic returns to our countries and to the Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Juan Daniel, and thanks to our panelists. I'm closing this section of our of our seminar, and really want to thank you all for the perspectives from countries, from Juan Daniel, Dominique, and Alex, and the perspective from the donor, from Annika. Thank you so much for being here, and Sarah from the UN side, and what you have brought to us, and of course Natalia for presenting the INNF to us. And Johannes, of course, your perspective from the clearinghouse and the international support for statistics. So thank you all, and really, really appreciate it. Now we're going to move to the last segment of our seminar, and hopefully stay on time and let everybody leave around 10:30 as a schedule. And here is a very exciting portion, if you can bear with us. Traditionally, it's been a tradition that every year before the UN Statistical Commission, there would be this special topics discussed on a Friday before the UN Statistical Commission, which is now, of course, we are the Friday seminar, but even though we are on Wednesday, and the outcome of the Friday seminar would be summarized, and there would be one special person. And today's a special person would be Juan Daniel, who would be summarizing the outcome of what we have been discussing, and being our messenger for taking these messages and rich discussions to the UN Statistical Commission, and hopefully making sure that these messages are heard by so many other countries who have not been able to join us and be here. So Juan Daniel, can we turn to you for telling us a summary, giving us a sort of a rundown of the summary from today's discussion? Thank you.
Thank you, Shada, and thank you very much for honoring me to be the rapporteur of this side event and for this special topic. I'm going to be very effective as regards to institutional effectiveness, and try to sum up the main ideas of the seminar in several key points. First, we have to make people conscious that the scenario of financing statistical and data requirements does not look good in this moment. Historically, we've seen some constraints, but the pandemic has reorganized the priorities of public financing and official development assistance, and we need to show the complexity and the challenges that imply the requirements of statistical and data in our societies. That's why we need to be very, very effective, mobilizing both the international and the domestic financing in order to provide enough resources in order to allow national statistics systems to provide sound information sets to our societies. That's why in this alignment of public budgets at the domestic level and official development assistance, we should value very much the role of the integrated national financing frameworks that provide a coordination and a governance scenario under which we could state how the statistical or data requirements in our society could provide answers to public policy priorities, to the Sustainable Development Goals accomplishment, and at the same time to accomplish this important goal of leaving no one behind. On the other side, we need to allow this scenario of the integrated national financing framework to show how a statistical information which is produced inside national statistics system could be an effective way to provide evidence to target official development assistance or public budgets in the accomplishment of the Building Back Better or the 2030 agenda. Key elements in securing national funding for data and statistics are the build-up of solid business cases and the importance of having a voice disseminating or communicating the evidence that is or lies behind the official statistics that we produce. That's why as regards to national statistics offices, we have to become very effective in the play or playing the role of data stewards in our societies. That's why we need to be proactive in our partnerships. We need to strengthen the existing relationships that we have, and we have to innovate, defining the opportunities of novel partnerships that are going to be very effective in supporting the sustainable development agenda and the data requirements that lie behind it. Finally, we understand that the governance of the international cooperation system, and more specifically the United Nations resident coordinators in every country, play an important role in every country in order to facilitate and prioritize which are the coordination agreements that should be set in our countries in order to allow the power of coordination to make us effective, identifying resources and matching demand and supply as regards as statistical information. As we have heard, the Statistician General of the Namibia Statistics Agency reminds us that National Statistics Office need to become better on communicating and explaining our goals. That's why the data stewardship challenge in this financing agenda is going to be tremendously important. On the other side, international organizations can provide support for national statistics offices as they engage in a dialogue with ministries to secure national funding for data and statistics, in particular by providing support for the NSDS planning and identifying data and capacity gaps and developing a realistic budget. That's why we understand very well that as a matter of conclusion, National Statistics Office, we play a key role actively pursuing the mobilizations of domestic resources for data and statistics, because assuring the local financing of data and statistical requirements, we are going to have an initial endowment in order to be proactive and to show the benefits from the social economic perspective of providing or supplying the statistics in our societies. And this is going to attract official development assistance in order to make better the role that we play in our societies. I think that those are the main messages that we have heard today, and probably in the continuity of this conversation, we are going to improve and to have a very good statement to report to the Statistical Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan Daniel. This was a fantastic summary. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sheda, for moderating the incredible panel. I think if I had to answer your question of the one thing that I would choose to raise the profile of statistics and ensure that we get funding is what the panel has demonstrated today, working together across the system in each country, the NSO together with all stakeholders, the donors, the country system, the UN system, the country teams, the resident coordinator, and of course with the help offered by the clearinghouse that can bring this together and ensure that the donors' investments coming from the outside match the country priorities. So I think there's been a great discussion, and I hope the Commission will consider very seriously the summary that Juan Daniel has so kindly put together. So thanks again to everyone, and thanks so much for all the participants who've stayed with us for longer than expected, 5 minutes over time. And I hope I'll see you all of you at the Commission virtually, but at least you'll be part of the discussion. Thanks again, and thanks, Sheda. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you and bye.